Welcome to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Nave. Today, my guest is George Johnson. George was chosen by the TEDx Asheville Selection Committee to present a talk at TEDx Asheville coming up March 20th. And he's speaking on the topic of transgender. George is a well-spoken, provocative young man with a lot to say. So let's dive right into the conversation with George. I think you're going to enjoy it. The conversation begins with me asking George how he plans to address the subject of transgender on the TEDx Asheville stage. So here we go. I reached out to you because you have been chosen to be one of the March 2026 TEDx Asheville speakers. Congratulations, George.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be doing it.
And I'm grateful that you've agreed to come and talk with us today. I would like for you to start by giving us an overview of what motivated you to submit your application to TEDx Asheville. What gave you the confidence to do it? I will say, for those who are listening, George, you are still under 20. Your voice is one of the voices we can hopefully hear for a long time to come in leadership roles. And I know you have that in mind as well. So let's start by you just giving the audience an overview of what's going on with you. Why is your TEDx Asheville talk important? And then I'll come up with some questions and we'll go from there.
I actually chose to give this talk because I've done speech and debate for 4 years now. I've had the privilege of getting to do national public speaking, and the thrill of sitting in a room to like 300 people and just really invoking an emotion in them is something I've been chasing really since high school. I graduated last June. It's my first year of college, and it kind of hit me that I wasn't going to get that public speaking this year because the college league has just been something that I haven't been able to hit. And so I looked around at some public speaking opportunities, and I was actually looking through some old speech and debate, like ballot comments, and I had a judge tell me on a speech I gave 2 years ago on a similar topic that I would love to hear this speech outside of the bounds of speech and debate. And I want this to hit a larger audience. And honestly, it got me looking into some opportunities for that. And it was actually my high school principal who had reached out to me telling me that she's running this cool new program in Asheville that she'd love me to get to apply to. And so that started the journey for it. And my biggest thing with it is that my talk is surrounding a lot of my identity. And I, as a trans speaker, came out in the 5th grade because I saw someone on YouTube who had come out to their parents. And their bravery allowed me to have that moment of just clarity. And now that I'm in that spot where I'm having a stage, I'm able to be at an age where I can both hit the adults in the room and also hit the younger audience, where if I can just invoke some type of kindness, some type of clarity for those younger people and those older people.
The Trans National Railroad, transportation, transition. To trans means you're going to go from point A to point B. Please explain to those people out there who are grammatically unfamiliar with the insider phrasing exactly what you are talking about and how you apply it to this idea of the transnational railroad, or I'm going to transition from the West Coast to the East Coast, or vice versa.
So the trans I'm talking about here is transgender. I was born the youngest of 4 girls, and when I was around 10, so 5th grade, I told my mom, I sat her down while she was watching the movie Zoolander, and I told her that I wanted to be a boy. And then from there, it wasn't some like magical shift. It was about a 8-year journey of getting like treatment of doing social transitioning, going from that point A of being seen as female to point, honestly, A.5 of being seen as this weird like in between a male to female. And then finally landing at the male, where now I get to walk outside and people don't really assume anything besides the fact that I'm a cisgender male, as in cis being born male. But it's kind of interesting getting to do this talk and getting to inform people that not every transgender person looks the same or acts the same. Because I think in the news a lot, we see this like specific imagery of what a transgender person is. And in a lot of ways, I fit into it. And in a lot of ways, I don't. And it's kind of fun getting to just surprise people, being like, hey, we're here. We've always been here, but we come in all different sizes and fonts.
So you say this awareness arrived for you when you were 10 years old.
Mhm.
10 years is 10 years old. That's very young. Did you have a sense that the goal of transitioning from girl to boy would require any courage, or was it just simply something very natural? Like, well, I really don't feel that comfortable here. I want to go there. Whereas as an adult might go like, this is going to take some real spine to make this happen for me. What's the difference there?
I think honestly, being a kid when I came out did help me in a lot of ways because I was at a stage where all of my peers hadn't even hit puberty yet. So I didn't really sound that different from any of my male peers, given that all guys had this squeaky low voice. And so I would say it's innate that I had this like feeling for my entire childhood. And once again, being the youngest of four girls meant I got hand-me-downs. And thankfully, some of my sisters were tomboys. But there was always this little feeling that I think really hit in the start of elementary school that it wasn't necessarily just tomboy, that the feeling of my old name, the feeling of being seen as a sister, not a brother, just really hit. And it was about fifth grade, yeah, I actually had a kid in my class who ended up coming out as transgender. And that was after a few months of me already having heard the term through online. And so it was a little bit of an easier process now than when I'm an adult. So, fun little fact, I mentioned earlier that I now have the privilege of being seen as a cisgender male, but that's actually come up to be a little bit of a problem giving this speech in the sense that I have now gone to college and everyone there assumes I'm a cisgender male. Like I'm in the males' dorms, I'm in student government, I'm in all these like positions where people see me, they know my name. I'm at UNC Asheville, a place that has maybe 3,000 people. So you get to know everyone. So now I'm coming out with that whole little question you're asking of is it easier as a kid or as an adult? Because now as an adult, I'm having to have that much more courageous action of I'm walking in knowing I'm about to come out to all of my peers, even though they don't know that yet. Being an adult, I know all the bad that comes with it, along with the good.
So coming out's an interesting concept. I'm coming out of the house and I'm going to go to the movies. We all come out. In a sense, you could even speak of it theologically. I'm reborn every day. I'm coming out of the night into the new day. So I'm thinking it would be interesting to have you reflect because I'm glad you brought this up. Now I'm almost 20. I'm at UNCA. I'm in the male dorms with my colleagues. People don't know I have trans from girl to boy. Would you say that the coming out part when you were 10, would it be fair to say you came out or were you just there? You didn't actually come out. It just seemed a natural part of the being in. And then now you're coming out in a different way because you're announcing out.
In my 18 years of living, that's actually something that's never quite crossed my mind. But I would say you're kind of right on that in the sense that when I was little, it was scary. Don't get me wrong. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. However, it was also this foreign concept because I had just seen it online. I had seen it from my classmate. I'm in Asheville. I've always lived here, a place that's fairly liberal in most places. However, it also still had this underlying knowledge of this is different. So when I had that talk with my mom, once again, she was watching a movie. I think when we think of coming out a lot, we think of those like big movie reveals of like sitting down with their parents and having this really tough conversation. That conversation with my mom was more like a 3-year conversation. She was very accepting in that moment, and like throughout it all, she's been like my number one ally. However, it also wasn't just a once again like one and done. Compared to now in college, I've come out to a few of my close friends, and it has been a one and done. It's been a I tell them, and they process it. But because I'm already being perceived as male, there's not really much of a shift that comes with it. When I was little, there was that shift and there was that processing time where it wasn't just that one conversation of, Mom, I want to be a boy, or Mom, I am a boy. It was, Mom, I'm a boy, but there are steps that I need to get there.
So as you're describing this, I am seeing the cocoon and I'm seeing the butterfly emerge. So when you were 10, you were experiencing an emergence, a coming out in the sense of rising from one thing into another over a slow period of time. A bit like the sun doesn't just appear in the sky, it actually has to come up because the earth turns. Now, the one and done is very different. Announcing your arrival. I'm here. It's the flag planting. I am out. Look, here it is. Reflect on those two states of being.
I would say that the slow process was a lot harder in a lot of ways because I know we had that conversation earlier of saying that the second time was it took a lot more courage. However, the first time came with so many more battles with it. Of like you said, it's a slow emergence. It had some of the worst years of my life of having people accepting me, but then looking in such a way that everyone else around that like small circle didn't know not to view me as female. And compared to now, where I've had this treatment, I've had this affirmation of my gender, where when I walk outside, people don't question it in the same way. And so that battle, because it was about an 8 year battle, maybe six, but it was all throughout the rest of that elementary school, middle school, and first 2.5 years of high school. It was much more slow, and it was something that I didn't fully know if I was going to emerge on the other side because it was such a hard place to be in to have all this love and all this supporting, but not having any show for it in a way.
When you were experiencing this younger, it was an internal George thing. Okay, I'm going to track this. This is where I'm headed. This is who I am. Externally, people will look at what you've done, and some will be, okay, great, I'm fine, no problem. Off you go on your merry way. Everybody's happy. Other people can be so damn antagonistic that they might shoot you. So you really have this broad range that's going on out there. When you were doing this on your own from the internal point of view, did you have any conflicts yourself around value judgments that you made toward yourself? Or did it seem, oh, this is just a normal thing that I need to do? It's going to take a bit of effort, but I'm willing to do it.
I think there was some value questioning of it. Specifically, it came from my mom, honestly. I mentioned earlier that my mom has been one of the most pivotal figures in my life throughout this journey. However, she was terrified when I came out. That was the reason that it took her 3 years to have that journey because she knew that she was going from having this kid who was safe, who I am privileged in so many ways, and this immediately just stuck me down. Of it put me in a crowd where my mom couldn't guarantee that I was going to be safe when I walked outside, that going to school was going to be safe, that all this stuff that then I think internalized into myself a little bit in a lot of ways, where it questioned at times, specifically in my sophomore year of high school, of is this worth it? Is all of this like pain worth it to not have that same affirmation on the outside? Because it really hit me on the sense that it wasn't the people who were intentionally cruel that hurt the most. In that period of my life, it was the people who were kind, which is such a weird thing to say, but it was the people who were trying so hard, but who then perceived me as trans, not as a boy. And so that was the hardest battle for me because it was saying, I can't be mad at these people. There's nothing they're doing wrong, and there's nothing I'm doing wrong. It is just a way of being perceived. And I think that was probably the hardest conflict I had in that of saying, wouldn't it be so much easier to just go back to being a girl, to just have all this to, it would be significantly easier in my social life, in relationships, and all of this, and getting a job. But I think it did kind of sit with me in that year a lot that it wouldn't be worth it because it wouldn't be me in so many ways, that I wouldn't want to live a life in hiding compared to living a life where even if it's painful, I still am able to live freely.
So, as you have moved into this adult realm, transitioning from girl at 10 through to young man at almost 20, one of the things that I know from a male point of view, I never experienced that. I was just, okay, here I am. Now here I am. And that's that. I didn't have to come out as anything. Males have sets of codes that they use. Now I'm thinking if you started at 10 and you were working from the point of view of male from 10 on, you probably learned all of the male coding. And when I say male coding, what I mean, two men on a street, one guy
Well, my
sitting on a stoop in Brooklyn, and the other guy walks by, and there's this slight male nod that few people notice, but I go in peace, just a little male nod. Can you speak to the coding and also to just the general dilemma we have about who we are and why we exist and our reasons to be?
That is actually something I have wanted to write a thesis paper on, of noticing the differences of being perceived as male versus female, and especially that weird in between, like I noticed, because there was majority of my life that I was being viewed as neither. I was being viewed as trans, and there were coding throughout all of it. So as a kid, I think one of the easiest ways to talk about this is I was the poster child for ADHD as a child. I was running around, I was talking nonstop, I was doing all this disruptive nature. However, I was perceived as a girl, and I did not get any type of diagnosing in that. All my teachers viewed me as polite because even if I was talking nonstop, even if all this stuff was happening, I was still making fine grades. I was still talking to my peers. And then in that like weird middle period of my life, I started failing my classes. I started doing really, really, really terribly in school. All this because I found out other ways to learn, and I got really bored. I was also COVID in middle school, so that was a little bit of an off time. Online school was not good for me. But the biggest thing I noticed in that is the minute I started being perceived as male, people would not question whether I had ADHD or not. It was just an automatic assumption of the more I talked, the more I was walking around, the more I was like doing all this stuff. It was just this like shift in people's brain of, oh, yeah, that's what this is. And in a very similar vein, not just academics, but I got accommodations much easier as a male than I did as a female. Because I think it's something to do with our society viewing women as a lot more competent in a lot of ways, but also a lot more like silent. Whereas the male, even just like when my voice dropped, I started noticing that it was honestly perceived with a lot more like weight behind it. And I think the easiest way I saw that was I gave a speech. It was my junior year of high school. I was on the first early months of testosterone therapy. So my voice hadn't dropped yet. I looked at a video the other day. It was high. It was like a squeaky Mickey Mouse. But I was giving this speech and I noticed judges really, really, really connecting with it because they were seeing this like child giving their story, talking all about like the weight of being queer in today's age. However, by December of that year, my voice had dropped. And with that, I noticed immediately I was no longer questioned of people didn't start seeing me as incompetent. Like when I walked in the room, my fidgeting, my nervousness wasn't seen as a weakness. More so, it was seen as a type of not quite charismatic, more something to be loved in a way. It was this little moment of just like, oh, that's cute, that's admirable, compared to that's weird. And my last little thing on the perception, because this is something I find very, very interesting, is I think I noticed that like little male coding the absolute most in the sense that I've had female friends my entire life. It was a bigger shift though when I started testosterone, is that I'd had some very close male friends throughout my early childhood, and then in middle school I started switching to more female friends. And in that group, I honestly recognized the scariness of being perceived as a cis male in a lot of ways, in that I would have arguments plenty before. I did speech and debate. I'm someone who argues. But when my voice was high, when I was being perceived as trans or as female, it wasn't scary. People didn't have any type of reaction to it besides being like a little annoyed at having an argument. However, I noticed a really big shift that happened when my voice dropped, where a lot of my friends who are female would kind of have this turnoff of an argument before that was normal would now be perceived as a type of trigger. And it's something that was really scary to me to now be seen as almost unsafe in these spaces. Whenever I walk outside, I do the male nod. I do like I get called bud and like sir and all this stuff of like these male mannerisms, even just taking up more space. Like I became more confident. I walk more with my chest now. I do the man spread. Like all these little things that we kind of joke about, but were privileges I didn't even recognize until other people start perceiving me this way. Came with this whole like ups and downs in it.
Staying on this for a moment, you
Yeah.
said when I was a girl, I was perceived one way. When I was trans, I was perceived another. Now that I am a boy slash young adult, young male, I am perceived in a different way. The idea of being trans is not something that is a fixed star. So, at what point do people who are identifying as trans stop identifying as trans? Or are there people that just identify as trans and that's their identity?
I think it can be a mix of both in a way. Of I know men who have lived stealth their entire life and will never be anything but stealth, as in not coming out as transgender, as in always keeping that cis privilege. Because honestly, most of it comes down to the privilege of I am now at 18 being perceived as having had male privilege my entire life, when in reality, I've only had it since I was 16 and a half. And now it's this conversation of, am I about to give all that up to be perceived as trans? And with that, I think it's a battle that a lot of people face because not everyone wants to have to be a spokesperson. I honestly enjoy it, and where I enjoy being able to educate people, being able to talk, tell my story, all this. 2 years ago, that wasn't true. 2 years ago, I would have given anything to just be seen as male and give up the trans identity overall. However, now that I am in a comfortable space, that I have the body that fits with me, that my voice aligns, all this, it's easier for me to talk about it. And it's easier for me to give up that privilege in a lot of ways, even if it's still scary.
So, as a male coming out with your TEDx Asheville talk, revealing how you managed to arrive at maleness, you are saying, I'm coming out as trans, but wouldn't it be fair to say that you are formerly trans and now a male? Because you can't really come out as trans because that's history. Or will that be
That's true.
perceived in a different way by the people that you present this to? This is complicated, George. I'm glad you have to do it, not me,
No,
man. But I am curious.
it is. And it definitely feels scary being the spokesman for this community, given that I know that I still have a lot of privilege in this. I know that even if I am being now seen as trans, it still comes with the fact that my voice is low enough, my mannerisms are male now, that I don't think it's going to necessarily bring as much danger as it would have when I was 14. And God forbid, it's not going to bring as much danger as I was if I was a black trans woman. There's this layering of it. I'm giving this talk because I'm safe, because I live in Asheville. I would not be giving this talk in, honestly, places 30 minutes out from here. We are in a bubble of liberal space, but I'm giving this talk because I'm safe to do so. And on that whole little thing of whether I'm coming out as trans, I would say yes, because there's still progress to be made in the sense that I still have a few surgeries down the line that I'm planning on getting. And the biggest thing is that I honestly, an hour ago, I just did my testosterone shot. That it is a weekly shot I'm going to be doing the rest of my life. That it's something that even if I am now male, because I always have been male, it's just now it fits the body and the mind. So I think it still is under the umbrella in my personal life as being trans because it's still moving forward.
Good answer. We are a part of all that we've met. We bring forward to this moment everything that we've encountered. They say we all have male, female in us. And if that's true, what part of the female aspects that you do remember that are part of you, what part of those have moved forward into your maleness and serve you in ways that are creative, useful, positive?
This is something I've actually had a lot of conversations about since coming to college. I am perceived as infinitely more kind. That those admittedly pretty misogynistic things that we teach young women to hold space for men, to always like be willing to listen to the other side, that's something that I bring into my maleness that while I'm not going to let people walk over me, while I still am an arguer at heart, I try and hold empathy in a way that I think a lot of cisgender men are not taught to, because I think a lot of cisgender men are taught to hide their emotions. They're taught that this isn't okay to be feminine. And so coming into maleness, I'm not really afraid of the femininity anymore. There was a point in my life that I think a lot of transgender men experience. It was right before I was able to get testosterone. It was that solid year building up to still being like that awful year of sophomore year, being seen as trans and nothing more. Where I honestly had a whole lot of that traditional toxic masculinity that you see in cisgender men. If you've ever heard of I think it's called temporarily embarrassed millionaires. It's this concept where people within a social group will then attack or say things to put down people within their own group just because it puts them on a higher spot. So, for my experience in that, and once again, for something that I've personally seen a lot of other trans men go through, not all trans men, but like a fair amount, where you're trying so hard to be perceived as male, you're trying to do everything in your possible way. It brings a lot of shame towards feminine stuff. Things like showing kindness, things like cooking, things that are like seen as traditionally more feminine, where it's almost this little notch in my brain. Am I less of a male for this? And it became this constant battle just where I would unintentionally put other people down in my community, even if it wasn't spoken out loud, where I would think to myself, well, I'm passing better than that guy. And it's something that was a really icky feeling. But whenever I got on testosterone, it went away. All that toxic masculinity got worked through. I think being in that space of the in between forced me to work through it in a way that a lot of cisgender men will never be forced to do in the same way. A lot of cisgender men are never going to be in that position where you're trying so hard to be as like masculine as possible, and suddenly you just are. That suddenly everything you were worried about just goes out the window because everyone just views you as perfectly masculine as all this. It's an interesting thing I've noticed, but I would decidedly say the empathy and the kindness is what I've brought the most. And it's something that I'm not really ashamed of as much as I was before.
Well, it's worthwhile to have a bit of empathy and kindness. That is true. And I think we can develop empathy and kindness. I've never thought of myself as particularly all that overly empathetic, but I do have soft spots for people, and I can allow my empathy to come out. And when it does, it feels good. It rewards me. Kindness feels good when it comes toward me. If you're kind to me, I feel a little better. And I'm sure you feel the same way. There are a lot of people out there who, there are a lot of people out there that aren't able to see what we're talking about in a way that even allows them to get close to it because they're so angry about it. Do you have any thoughts on that? Can you solve that? Probably not. People are going to be angry. People are not going to be angry.
6 years ago, I would say no way. There's no way to change it. There's nothing. However, I think it was giving that speech a few years ago during junior year where I was able to see that there is possibility. It's harder because for a lot of judges, it wasn't just seeing that I was trans. It wasn't just seeing like the bad parts of it. A lot of it came from being seen as a child, as telling my mom's story throughout it, of connecting with parents on that level, of not trying to tackle the whole issue of what being trans is. Not like I could have a judge who would hate the fact that I was trans, but would accept the fact that they wouldn't want their child to not come home. And it was that moment where they didn't have to understand it, but you don't have to understand to love. And so having that little bit of realization, for example, I don't understand the thought process behind not loving someone who's trans. However, it's still something that I find myself trying to put myself in the shoes of that person and trying to find ways to crack it, trying to find ways to see where they're not necessarily where they're coming from, because I think honestly a lot of it is bad, but see the trauma behind it and trying to understand it through that perspective of instead of trying to tackle the whole issue as solve all transgender hate crimes, solve all transphobia, of saying instead, listen to the story of a kid and look at me as a kid. And even if I'm a young adult, seeing me as a young person trying and connecting through those other parts, connecting through those parts of I've had times in my life where I was also upset, where I didn't feel seen of all this. I have a child. I have this whole array of thoughts that can connect with me because I think that's where it comes from. Is it's the whole point of my talk is being seen as human and not a headline. And so whenever we're able to actually see each other's stories, I'm probably not going to be turning a huge transphobic person untransphobic in a 10-minute speech. However, it's those people in the audience who are on the fence, who it's not that they're intentionally hateful, it's that they don't know. And those are the people that I think can kind of swap.
Phobia. That's the deepest of all fears. I have a phobia of heights. I would like to brag how brave I am until I cross Independence Pass in Colorado, headed over to Aspen, down mountain to Carbondale. And when I got halfway up the pass, I freeze while I'm driving. That's a phobia. I wonder when we use the term transphobia or any kind of phobia, I wonder if that fear that arises in the person who is afraid, that fear is not so much about being afraid of the person who's transitioning, but the fears that come up in themselves around the identities that they're struggling with, completely unrelated to transgender issues. What do you think about that?
I kind of agree fully on it. Metathesiophobia, I think that's more so what it is. I think a lot of people who have this phobia of trans people are not nearly as concerned of someone who is born female going to male. I think that they're scared of what that change is. I think it's less so the actual fear of what being trans is, and more so the fear of these challenges to what being themselves is. You think of those macho men who have been taught from the moment they were born, like, I'm not allowed to cry, I'm not allowed to do all this stuff, because that's not seen as being a man. And then you have a trans guy coming up here showing those exact same stuff. I think it's easier for them to still view them as women, or it's easier to still like view them as not truly a man, because then it doesn't harm their idea and their identity of being macho men.
And I've had more than one conversation with people around transgender issues, and I've engaged it. I'm curious about all things, and this especially. But a lot of adults who dig in and are very aggressive around their opinions regarding the goods and the bads of transgender issues, they will say, well, it's just fine for somebody who's over 18 to make that decision. But if you're younger than 18, you are not in the position to do it. And damn it, I am against it. You've heard that story before. Why is this important to address when one is 10 years old? The girl transitioning to boy. What's going on here?
Honestly, I think it's that it's a double standard. I don't know how much history you know on what being transgender is or on hormone therapy and all that, but kids have been getting like kids, like as in 10 years old to 13-year-old cisgender people, people born in their gender, staying in their gender, have been taking hormone blockers since the 1980s, far before when transgender people got on them. This was for people who had medical conditions, even in some cases for people who just weren't ready to go through puberty yet. However, those were seen as fine. And keep in mind, those are still being seen as fine today. Like under all those like bans of hormone therapy towards children, it's just the trans people. It is not the actual, like, it is not anyone else on that gender affirming care. In a very similar way to gender affirming care, it's men who take minoxidil to regrow hair. it's women who get breast augmentation surgery. Fun fact, I think it's 23% of cisgender women regret breast augmentation surgery compared to the 0.3% of trans people who do. So it's this constant double standard of saying one group is allowed to have this while the other group isn't. However, all the laws, all the conversations surrounding it completely paint it as, oh, the entire thing is bad. And so I don't know, it's just something I think a lot on in that.
I can tell you do, George, and I can see you have lots of depth around this. Speaking of depth, you are turning your attention now to the rehearsal process for TEDx Asheville, March the
Mhm.
20th at Dinah Wortham Theater. Ta-da, TEDx 2026 Asheville will arrive, and you will be one of the speakers. Can you give us, as we move toward the last 15 minutes or so of our time together, a sense of what you are doing with all of the experience that you have around speech and presentation and debate, and obviously you're articulate? How are you going to consolidate that into 11, 12-minute speech? What's it going to look like? Are you having trouble with it? Do you already have it in your head? Where is it headed? How's it going to evolve?
In a lot of ways, it's not that different. And that's been a really big shock for like all the coaches I've been talking to in reference to this. So my event in speech and debate was a 10-minute persuasive talk that was memorized and you wrote yourself. So there aren't really that many differences besides the fact that speech and debate in a lot of ways was a lot harder because you had active judges. You had people who were like sitting there literally critiquing your every moment. In this, it's more so these are people paying to go here. They're people wanting to hear this talk. And admittedly, it's the bigger challenge is the online factor, is the how do I get this to as many people as possible, especially being so young that most of the other speakers, like at this, we had a meeting a little bit ago where we all got to meet each other. And there was this moment of just clarity for me where one of the people was like, and this isn't like a shame to them, it's just a really funny moment where they're like, yeah, I feel like I never get to hear from Gen X. I feel like we're like, it's we always hear from our parents. And then he was like, is anyone else Gen X here? And like three people raised their hand. And then the next person was like, we got any millennials? And I'm like, hey guys, we got any Gen Zs? And it was a whopping no. There was no other Gen Zs in that room. And it for me has been a battle though of I don't have a online presence. I don't have like I haven't written a book. Like people have been talking about how they've been doing nonprofit work for 10 years. I was 8 years old. I was in school. I was like, it's a different experience walking in. All leading up to that moment in March 20th, I'm having this constant battle in my head of figuring out how do I truly get this to reach as many people. And the bigger part of that as well is addressing the fact that I'm not going to be changing every single person's mind in the audience, but that I can try. That I can try and aim for the people who are on the fence, who just truly do not know. And I think that's the way I go about it is instead of assuming every single person is going to be transphobic, that it's like a one or done, assuming that most people are in the in between, that they're in the I haven't heard the right thing to truly move me to become actionable on this. I think the story part of it is that I plan to center my talk around giving my story because I think a lot of the transphobia comes from, once again, I mentioned earlier, 30 minutes out, a lot of people can't name a transgender person they know in their life. And so this talk allows me to introduce myself, to say, now you do know someone. You see that I'm normal, I'm boring, all this. I think the easiest thing to compare it to, not necessarily specifically me, but just having these trans speakers, is during AIDS, there was a really big outcry surrounding gay men. And it was a huge rise in homophobia for the next 2 decades. However, one of the honestly larger shifts in that mentality was the Ellen show, having this gay figure who was just normal. It wasn't any type of like scary thing. It wasn't like necessarily because everyone always talks about trying to like push stuff onto people. It wasn't any of that. It was just her talking. And so with my talk, that's kind of what I'm trying to do is just to give a platform to say, hey guys, we've always been here, but I'm introducing myself and really trying to hit on the parents of it. I think that's the biggest thing.
And I would think most of the TEDx Asheville audience, as well as the general TED audience around the globe, bring a level of curiosity to the listening that's natural for that category. So
Yep.
they won't have as much fear, maybe some, maybe uncertainty, maybe they're just not sure. But I would think curiosity would be the biggest driver. And that might mitigate or that might minimize any of the fear they have or soften the fear and open them up in a way that other people might not. The people that live 30, 40, 50 minutes out of Asheville, or people that live right in downtown Asheville, it doesn't really matter. The people who don't understand it and are fearful of it likely are fearful because they just have no reference.
I think one of the ways I've gone about that in the like writing process of this, because keep in mind, I'm in the earlier drafts. I've written a speech. I've worked with the coach. I'm submitting my rewritten speech like next week. All this. It's been going to the two TEDx round rug tables in Asheville, where you get to go and give a mini version of your speech to the community, and seeing how well that's done. My entire speech goes on this premise that I'm not going to drop no matter what. It's what this speech is starting with a question of what is 60 seconds? Three pets adopted, it's 52 weddings, 155 children born. But it's also every 60 seconds, according to a Trevor Project, when a queer person attempts suicide, and that trans people are twice as likely. And bringing that framework into it, I found through those two Red Rug Table events allows people to really clearly see what the issue is immediately before I can transform it into my own story and my own telling. The challenge with that I'm working on and think I found a solution to is there's a moment in any type of public speaking. If you go too fearful, if you go too painful, people turn away. It's just a level of uncomfortableness where people turn off. So my battle has been balancing that pain of my journey with the hope and the joy. And admittedly, my name is George Hope Johnson. So that's been something I kind of market off of a little bit. Bringing up that joy of just being seen as male, of these like little things that we don't think about, of getting to shave my face, of like being called sir in public. Like these tiny little things that just bring me such joy. And so it's this little thing. Yeah.
And as we close our time together, I do have one other thing I'd like for you to reflect on. This is a little more technical from the speech and presentation point of view. When I hear someone speak, what I love most is to watch them connect emotionally to whatever the subject is. I'm not that interested in how clean and crisp the thing is. Sometimes the clean, crisp, well memorized speech loses its value for me because it doesn't have the emotional connection. I'd like for you to close by talking about how you plan to connect emotionally to the piece that you're going to present and how valuable is it to have the whole thing word by word memorized? Is that where you're headed? Or will you be doing a bit of improvisational riffing as you go along? And how are you going to connect emotionally to pull us into these things that you want to say?
So I think I mentioned this earlier that in speech and debate, getting to those final rounds at nationals of this moment where I could look in the audience and out of the 300 people there, about 200 of them were sobbing their eyes out at a speech very similar to this. It was something where I think I have cried in quite a few versions of even giving this draft because it's the most personal thing I've ever shared. When looking at it like in writing, it doesn't look really as emotional. However, when delivering it to my mom, she started sobbing. And like it wasn't like necessarily a bad sobbing, but it was a wake up. And for her, especially getting to see the progress of it, because she's been seeing it since the very beginning when I first applied. And she's been preparing me for, hey, you're probably not going to get it. Hey, this is competitive. So for that moment of just clarity for it to be like, this hits. And it's still going to be evolved and like changed and changed and changed. But for me, the 10-minute fully memorized is how it works best because I can focus less on do I know the words and more how can I like lock eyes with the audience and really get my physical presence there. And admittedly, I got yelled at throughout my entire speech and debate career. Of it was always told in my circuit that George Johnson never gives the same speech twice because even though this meant to be memorized script, very oftentimes I would say something that was just so wrong. My speech and debate coach used to joke that I spoke in like in Pig Latin, that I would say something so confidently, but so wrong. Like one time I said there was 428 countries with six bills in it, and that's wrong. That's wrong. It's six countries with 428 bills. But you know what? You say it confidently, people trust. And a little bit of bad logic there, but it is memorized. But I also know my speaking style, and that nothing I memorize is ever going to be word for word. It's going to be I know the structure. I know how to insert part of the speech that I skip over back into it.
I think it's worth noting as we close,
Mhm.
memorization has a lot more to do with the relationship you have with the text, just like you have a relationship with a person, and a lot less to do with do I have the words right? The words right are it's just a little part of a much bigger integration that happens. I mean, in some ways, memorization, when it's done with that kind of goal in mind, you become very different. In a sense, memorization is a transitioning proposition as well. You have to transition into the essence of whatever it is that you're memorizing. And it becomes so integrated into your psychology, you don't know you even know it anymore. It's just there like the way you breathe.
And it's just like the back of your hand. And like, I know it is a different audience. I know that. Having given so many speeches that were like 10-minute, because there were tournaments where I would go in having three speeches memorized that were all three separate 10-minute speeches. And walking in, giving those each round, I'd always fear, what if I say the wrong thing? But it never happened. It never happened to such a point where I was scared I like fully lost the round. And so it's kind of, I'm just walking in with the trust that it's a learning curve, but I've done something like this before. Yeah. And that I just want to show to everyone in the audience that trans kids can grow up. It's not such a scary topic. Yeah.
Well, George Hope Johnson, thank you for taking the time out to enlighten us with your ideas. And I wish you all the luck in the world when you walk on that TEDx Asheville stage. I can't imagine it'll be anything other than glorious for all of us.
Let's hope. Thank you so much for having me on the talk. I'm very, very excited to get to continue hearing about this stuff.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with George Johnson. I'm more excited than ever to be at the TEDx Asheville presentation on March the 20th and hear what George has to say. I could tell by the way he formed his words and his thoughts as we were talking that he's had deep experience being in front of people while reaching back into his psychology and his intellect to create words and phrases easy to understand by a large audience or a singular person, one-on-one, right in front of him. So George clearly had a well-established connection intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually to the ideas that he feels moved to present to the public around transgender issues. On March 20th at the TEDx Asheville gathering. By the way, the theme for this year's 2026 TEDx Asheville gathering is Embrace the Mess, which begs these four questions. Where is the mess? What constitutes the mess? What makes the mess? And why would one embrace it? So to answer the first question, where is the mess? The mess is everywhere. And yet if you ask the mess if it is messy, the mess will likely say, no, I am not messy at all. I am organized. It's just that you don't quite understand how I've organized what you're looking at right now. So implied in embracing the mess, of course, is to embrace all of life because life seems messy. In his poem, The Emperor of Ice Cream, Wallace Stevens says, let be finale of seem. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. So when you encounter something that seems very messy, it might not be as messy as you think once you embrace it. Let be. Just be in the moment and see what happens because you understand how to make meaning out of everything you embrace. And that's the secret to all of this. And I think that's something that George understands. Now we come to the second question. What constitutes the mess? The mess is made up of how you perceive whatever it is that you are engaging in, whatever it is that you are embracing. Even the most organized apartment might seem messy in its organization to someone who prefers the more wild aspects of things, like the field that is growing full of wildflowers that doesn't seem particularly organized to the person who has the engineering mind that wants everything to be in human order. And yet the wild field has a mind of its own, and it constitutes its own mess, which is its own order. Again, George, I believe, understands this. We're looking forward to seeing what he does with it on the TEDx Asheville stage. So now we come to the third question: what makes the mess? Could it be that mess doesn't exist at all? Could it be that what we consider making mess is us declaring what we're looking at as messy? This is messy. Because when you think about the creative work that you've done over your lifetime, mess is definitely the currency of the creative work. It's where the energy lies. The messiness invites you to engage your own need to organize, to make meaning out of things, to figure out what to do with something that seems messy on the face of it. I will say that when I was in high school studying algebra, I always thought all of the algebraic expressions were messy. Not because they were, obviously they're not. Mathematics, very well organized. I had a messy perspective of something because I didn't understand it. It was my lack of understanding that made something that was well organized seem messy to me. Let B be. I didn't understand that as much as I understand that now. So when George steps on the TEDx Asheville stage in March to talk about transgender issues, he is bringing order to a messy subject that a lot of people just don't understand, and many, many people are afraid of. And as you know, fear generates a great deal of variables in life. George understands this, and yet he's still stepping on the stage. So now we come to the fourth question: why would anyone embrace the mess? Well, what else is there to embrace? What we see in the world seems messy and orderly, and that tension between mess and order is another kind of messiness. So why would we embrace it? We embrace it because that's just what we do. My good friend Kevin Cannon, who is an artist in Taos, often will say when people are talking about the creative work they do, he will say to them with a smile on his face, "Please, come on, you know very well, that's just what we do." And I think Kevin Cannon has got it right, and I believe George has it right as well. George knows that that is just what we do. Why would one embrace the mess? Because it is in our nature. Our nature as creatives, and we were born with this, our nature is to reach out and embrace what's in front of us. I was in an art store a couple of days ago looking at a young mother holding her child who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months. And the little child was poking its finger at all of the colored pencils, laughing and poking its finger at the colored pencils. And I thought, this child is learning something by pointing at the mess, and in the point, thus the embrace. So we all have that natural childlike sensibility to embrace whatever is in front of us. We call it mess. Perhaps we could call it something else. We're embracing life. We're embracing the order of the universe. We're embracing all the gifts that we've been given over the years. And as we come to the end of 2025, it's time to sit back for a moment and look out on the world. We are approaching 2026. Does it seem messy? Would you say, look at all that brouhaha out there. I just don't quite know what to do with it all. Well, what you can do with it all is to create things, to make things, to do what you feel called to do, just as George feels called to offer his well thought out perspective on transgender issues. You have well thought out perspectives. You can bring those to the table as well, in whatever form you like, as simple as paying attention to the person that you're talking to, listening a bit, bringing your own kind of human order to what we call messy. And yet, is it messy at all? Where is the mess? What constitutes the mess? What makes the mess? Why would one embrace it? You embrace it because, as Kevin Cannon says so often, hey, come on, really, that's just what we do. And on that note, I'd like to thank you ever so much for spending this time with me. If you're listening to this on WPVM FM or KCEI, you're listening over the 2025 Christmas weekend. So I hope you're having a happy Christmas, a happy holiday, however you celebrate this season. And if you're streaming this podcast on any platform and it's not December 2025, the world is still messy, so you can still embrace it and make something of it, like George is making something of his talk for TEDx Asheville coming up on March the 20th. I'm excited about that. Again, thanks ever so much for tuning in. This is Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Nave. This show airs every weekend on WPVM-FM in Asheville and KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. Thank you to Devine Dial for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier and Mike Tilley for doing the same with KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, which also broadcasts up into Colorado for those of you who are listening in Colorado. I hope all is well in that kingdom. If you'd like to reach me, nave@jamesnave.com. I would love to hear from you. I would appreciate an email. It's good fun to hear what's going on in your world. nave@jamesnave.com. And Walter Parks, thank you for the theme song. I appreciate the theme song and other music that I'm able to drop in that you've gifted me over the years. So there it is. We've arrived at the end. Thank you for spending some time with me. I do hope you come back sometime soon. And until then, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.